Did you know that 71% of the people that watch Matthew Kelly's videos are not subscribers? That makes no sense. We need to change that. Subscribe today. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and turn on those notifications so you never miss out on another great video ever again.
One of the questions I get asked a lot is, Matthew, you're involved at Dynamic Catholic, you founded Dynamic Catholic, you're leading Dynamic Catholic, but you're also involved in this consulting business. How do you split your time between the two? I spend more than 85% of my time at Dynamic Catholic working on Dynamic Catholic programs. I spend only about 10 or 15% of my time in the consulting business, and I have a great team there that really runs that business and works that business. And one of the things, though, I think we can learn from the consultants is that in the world of business, we measure everything. The best businesses in the world, they measure everything, because if you can't measure it, you can't change it. And so as you make this journey, I think you have to give some thought to what are you measuring? How do you know you're making progress? And how are you measuring your progress? Now, in business, of course, it's very objective. You sold 5 widgets this year, and you sold 4 widgets last year, and you made progress. In the spiritual life, in the things we're talking about, it's not like that. It's much more subjective. It's much more difficult to measure. And some things are simply impossible to measure. Sometimes people say, well, how do you know how much impact Dynamic Catholic is having on the church? In some ways, we can know it's having impact. There are some things we can measure. We can measure how many millions of people use our programs each year. And that's very objective. We can't measure how it impacts them. We can't measure how it changes their hearts. We can't measure how it brings them closer to God, or doesn't. We can't measure those things. But there are some things we can measure, and there are some things we should measure in order to ensure that we are actually making progress. The first, the most basic, is, are we doing this every day? You have this opportunity every day. I'd really encourage you to measure how many days do you do it? How many days do you miss it? And measure that. Be mindful of that. But there are other things that you can also measure. Depending on what it is you're trying to get after, depending on what change you feel God is calling you to at this time in your life, there are other things you can measure. And I encourage you today to think about, okay, what is it that you can measure? And to start measuring it. To start making notes each day. I can look back at the end of the day and say, did I make progress today? Did I really make an effort to walk with God? Did I really make progress in my spiritual life? And for the most part, we know. And I think it's important to measure that. So, progress, not perfection. Celebrate our progress, because the more we celebrate our progress, the more progress we're likely to make, and be measuring the things we can measure, because the things we measure, we tend to change. The things we tend to measure, the things we tend to grow in. And you can't measure everything, but there are some things we should be measuring, we can be measuring, and they help us to know that we're making progress. And the psychological encouragement that comes from knowing that we are actually making progress is incredibly powerful. The spiritual encouragement that comes from knowing that we are actually making progress is incredibly powerful. And so to leave that on the sidelines, I think, is an enormous mistake. So what are you measuring?